You know what really gets me? When people say one person can't make a difference. Because I'm about to tell you about a tank gunner who proved that wrong in the most insane way possible. One shot, one moment, and the entire outcome of a battle shifted. This actually happened, and when you hear how impossible this was, you're going to lose your mind. Okay, so let me set the scene for you. It's 1944. We're in France. The Allies have landed in Normandy and they're pushing inland, right? Everyone thinks the hard part is over. The beaches are secured. The Germans are retreating. But here's the thing nobody tells you about World War II. The real nightmare was just beginning for the tank crews. See, the Americans had the Sherman tank. You've probably seen it in movies. Medium-sized, pretty reliable, could be produced super fast. The problem? It was basically a death trap when it faced German armor. The Germans had the Panther and the Tiger tanks. These things were monsters. Thicker armor, bigger guns, and they could knock out a Sherman from distances where the Sherman couldn't even scratch them. American tank crews had a nickname for their own tanks. They called them Ronsons. You know why? Because of the lighter company's slogan. Lights first time, every time. Dark humor. But that's what happens when you know your tank can turn into a fireball with one hit. So there's this crew. 5 guys inside a Sherman, somewhere in the French countryside. The commander's name was Lieutenant John. The driver was Mike. The assistant driver/machine gunner was Tommy. The loader was Frank. And then there was the gunner. His name was Clarence Smoyer. Young guy. Probably scared out of his mind like everyone else, but he had something special. His hand-eye coordination was off the charts. Back in training, his instructors noticed he could track moving targets better than anyone they'd ever seen. But in the chaos of real combat, that's a whole different story. Their unit had been moving through this small French town. Buildings on both sides. Narrow streets. The worst possible place for tank warfare. You can't maneuver. You can't see what's around corners. And if an enemy tank is waiting for you, you're basically driving into your own funeral. The locals had told them the Germans pulled out. The infantry had swept through. Everything seemed clear. But war doesn't work like that. War has this way of putting you exactly where you don't want to be at exactly the wrong time. They're rolling down this main street. Stone buildings. A few civilians peeking out from windows. Everything's quiet except for the rumble of their own engine. And then someone spots it. About 800 yards down the street, sitting at an intersection. A German Panther tank. Just sitting there. Turret facing their direction. Now, 800 yards might not sound like much, but in tank terms, especially in a city street, that's a crazy distance. Most tank fights happened at a few hundred yards max. At 800 yards, hitting a target wasn't just hard. It was almost impossible with the equipment they had. Here's where it gets even worse. The Panther had already seen them. Its gun was traversing. That means it was turning to aim right at them. And everyone in that Sherman knew what was about to happen. If the Panther fired first, they were done. The Panther's gun could punch through a Sherman's front armor like it was paper. One hit, and everyone inside would either die instantly or burn to death. Those were your options. There was no time to reverse. No time to find cover. The street was too narrow to turn around quickly. They had maybe seconds before that German gunner had them lined up. Lieutenant John started yelling commands. Mike tried to position the tank to get the best angle. Frank was ready with another shell. Tommy was gripping his machine gun even though it was useless against a Panther. And Clarence? Clarence was looking through his gun sight at a target that was way too far away, trying to track a tank that was trying to kill him first. His hands were probably shaking. Everyone's were. But he had to take the shot. It was their only chance. Now, let me explain why this shot was so insane. The Sherman's gun was a 76mm. Decent, but not great. At 800 yards, the shell would drop. Wind would affect it. The sight picture would be tiny. And he wasn't aiming at a barn. He was aiming at a Panther tank, which had sloped armor designed to deflect shots. There were only a few weak points on a Panther, and hitting those weak points at that distance, under pressure, with another tank about to fire at you, the odds were basically zero. Tank gunners trained for this, sure, but training and real combat are completely different things. In training, nobody's trying to kill you back. Clarence made a decision. He didn't aim for the hull. Too much armor. The tracks? That would just immobilize it, and the Panther could still fire. He aimed for the only spot that made sense. The turret ring. That tiny gap where the turret connects to the hull. If he could hit that, the shell might jam the turret or even penetrate into the crew compartment. But it was such a small target. At that distance, it would look like trying to thread a needle while someone's punching you in the face. But what other choice did he have? He steadied his breathing, adjusted for distance, led the target slightly because the Panther was still moving its turret, and then he fired. The Sherman rocked back from the recoil. The barrel spat fire and smoke. For a second, nobody could see anything. The shell flew down that street, 800 yards, less than 2 seconds of flight time, but it probably felt like forever. And then, through the smoke, they saw it. The shell hit. Direct hit on the Panther. But did it penetrate? Did it do anything? Or did it just bounce off? This is the moment where everything hung in balance. The Panther's turret stopped moving. Smoke started pouring out of it. And then, the most beautiful thing these guys had ever seen. The crew hatch popped open and German soldiers started bailing out. Clarence had done it. He'd hit the turret ring. The shell had either jammed the turret mechanism or injured the crew inside, or both. The Panther was combat ineffective. It couldn't fire back. The German crew was abandoning it. The Sherman crew erupted in celebration. They were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. But here's the thing that makes this story even bigger than just one lucky shot. That Panther wasn't alone. It was the lead tank of a German column that was setting up an ambush. If that Panther had knocked out the Sherman, the rest of the American column would have driven right into a kill zone. Multiple tanks would have been destroyed. The entire advance through that sector would have stopped. Casualties would have been massive. But because Clarence made that shot, because he took out the Panther first, the German ambush fell apart. The other German tanks retreated. The American advance continued, and the Allies kept pushing pushing toward Germany. One shot changed the tactical situation for an entire battle. One moment of incredible skill under the worst pressure imaginable. And here's what really gets me about this story. Clarence Smoyer wasn't some legendary war hero that everyone knows about. He was just a guy doing his job. A young guy from Pennsylvania who probably just wanted to go home. But in that moment, he did something extraordinary. And the crazy part? He almost didn't talk about it after the war. See, a lot of World War II veterans didn't talk about their experiences. The stuff they went through was so intense, so traumatic, that they just wanted to move on with their lives. Clarence was the same way. He came home, got a regular job, raised a family, and barely mentioned the war. It wasn't until decades later, when historians started interviewing veterans and going through combat footage, that his story really came out. And when people finally heard about it, they couldn't believe it. Military analysts looked at the distances involved, the equipment used, the circumstances of the shot, and they all said the same thing. That shot shouldn't have been possible, but it happened. You know what I find fascinating? The human element of all this. Because we can talk about tactics and armor penetration and ballistics all day, but at the end of it, this was about people. 5 guys in a metal box, terrified, knowing they might die in the next few seconds, and still doing their jobs. That's what war really is. It's not the big strategic movements you see on maps. It's these tiny moments where individual people have to make impossible decisions under impossible pressure. And sometimes, if you're skilled enough and lucky enough, you survive. Let's talk about the technical side for a second, because it's actually really interesting. The Sherman 76mm gun fired an armor-piercing shell that weighed about 15 pounds. When it left the barrel, it was traveling at about 2,800 feet per second. That's fast, but it slows down as it travels because of air resistance. By the time it reached 800 yards, it had lost a lot of velocity, and velocity is what you need to penetrate armor. The less velocity, the more likely the shell just bounces off. So Clarence wasn't just fighting distance and accuracy problems. He was fighting physics itself. The Panther's turret ring was only a few inches wide, maybe 4 or 5 inches of gap between the turret and the hull, and it wasn't like it was just sitting there perfectly still. The whole tank was vibrating from its own engine. The turret was moving as the German gunner tried to aim. There was probably dust and smoke in the air from other combat nearby. The Sherman Clarence was in was also moving slightly because Mike the driver was trying to position them better. So Clarence had to compensate for his own movement, the target's movement, the distance, the drop of the shell, and the wind, all while knowing that if he missed, he was dead. That's not just skill. That's some kind of next-level ability that most people just don't have. After the shot, after the celebration died down, the crew had to keep moving. That's another thing about war that people don't realize. You don't get to stop and process what just happened. You don't get therapy sessions after traumatic events. You just keep going because there's another objective, another mission, another potential threat around every corner. So they pushed forward. They cleared the town. They linked up with other American units, and they kept fighting. The Panther that Clarence knocked out was eventually examined by intelligence officers. They wanted to know exactly what happened. When they looked at the damage, they found that the shell had hit the turret ring at almost a perfect angle. It had punched through a weak point and fragmented inside the turret, damaging the traverse mechanism and wounding at least one crew member. If the shell had hit just an inch or two in any direction, it probably would have bounced off. That's how precise this shot was. The story spread through the unit pretty quickly. Other tank crews heard about it. Some didn't believe it at first. They thought it was exaggerated or just luck. But the guys who saw it happen, they knew. And word got back to command. Clarence's officers made note of it in after-action reports. But in the chaos of the war, individual acts of skill like this often got lost. There were so many battles, so many actions, so many people doing extraordinary things that it was hard to document everything. Clarence didn't get a medal right away. He didn't get a parade. He just got to stay alive and keep fighting. And honestly, for most soldiers, that was reward enough. Staying alive was the goal. Everything else was secondary. Let me give you some context about what tank warfare was really like, because I think it helps you understand just how insane this moment was. Tank crews had one of the most dangerous jobs in the war. The survival rate was not good. If your tank got hit, you had seconds to get out before it caught fire or exploded. The inside of a tank was cramped, loud, hot, and filled with things that could kill you even if the enemy didn't. Ammunition stored inside could cook off. Fuel could ignite. The armor that was supposed to protect you could turn into shrapnel if a shell penetrated. And if you got hit by a high explosive round, the overpressure alone could kill everyone inside without even breaching the armor. So these guys were basically driving around in a potential bomb, knowing that they were priority targets for every German anti-tank gun, tank, or aircraft in the area. The psychological pressure was unbelievable. Imagine sitting in that gunner's seat. You're looking through a tiny sight. Your field of view is super limited. You can hear everything happening around you, but you can't see most of it. The commander is yelling updates. The driver is maneuvering. The loader is slamming shells into the breach. The whole tank is shaking and bouncing, and you have to keep your eyes on the sight, track the target, make minute adjustments, and fire at exactly the right moment. Your hands have to be steady even though your heart is pounding. Your mind has to be calm even though you're absolutely terrified. It's like being a surgeon in the middle of an earthquake, except the patient is trying to kill you. Clarence had trained for months before he ever saw combat. Gunnery training was intense. They practiced on ranges with moving targets. They learned how to judge distances. They studied enemy armor and where the weak points were. They fired thousands of practice rounds, but nothing really prepares you for the real thing. Training targets don't shoot back. Practice ranges don't have your friends dying around you. And the pressure of knowing that your skill is the only thing keeping your crew alive, that's something you can't simulate. Some guys cracked under that pressure. They froze up. They couldn't pull the trigger. They made mistakes, but Clarence didn't. When the moment came, he did exactly what he needed to do. And that's what separates the people who survive war from the people who don't. It's not always about being the bravest or the strongest. Sometimes it's just about being able to function when everything is falling apart around you. After the war ended, Clarence came home. He didn't talk much about what he'd done. His family knew he'd been a tank gunner, but he didn't go into details. That was common for that generation. They'd seen things that were hard to put into words. They'd lost friends. They'd done things they weren't proud of, and they just wanted to move on. Clarence got a job, settled down, and lived a quiet life. For decades, his story was just another forgotten piece of World War II history. But then something happened. In the early 2000s, a group of historians and filmmakers started going through old combat footage that had been filmed during the war, and they found something incredible. They found actual footage of Clarence's tank engaging that panther. See, the Army had combat cameramen who followed units and filmed battles for documentary purposes. One of those cameramen happened to be with Clarence's unit that day. He'd filmed the entire engagement. The footage showed the Sherman moving down the street. It showed the panther in the distance, and it showed the moment Clarence fired and the shell hit. For decades, this footage had been sitting in archives, and nobody had really paid attention to it. But when the historians found it and matched it up with the after-action reports and interviewed the surviving crew members, they realized what they had. They had documented proof of one of the most incredible shots in tank warfare history, and Clarence was still alive. They reached out to him. At first, he was hesitant to talk about it. He was an old man by then. The war was a lifetime ago, but eventually, he agreed to tell his story. And when he did, people were amazed. Here was this humble, quiet guy who had done something extraordinary and never bragged about it, never sought recognition, just went on with his life. The footage was included in a documentary. Clarence was interviewed. His story finally got told, and people started to understand just how incredible that moment was. Military historians analyzed the shot. They confirmed that it was one of the longest successful tank-on-tank engagements of the war. The precision required, the pressure involved, the stakes of the moment, all of it combined to create something truly remarkable. But here's what I love most about this story. It's not just about the shot, it's about what it represents. In a war involving millions of people, where individual lives often seemed meaningless in the face of massive armies and huge battles, one person still mattered. One moment of skill, courage, and clarity could change everything. Clarence's shot saved his crew. It saved the tanks behind him. It kept the advance going, and in some small way, it contributed to the Allied victory. Every single person who fought in that war had moments like this. Maybe not as dramatic, maybe not as well documented, but moments where they had to do something hard and scary, and they did it anyway. That's the real story of World War II. Not just the generals and the big decisions, but the millions of individual moments where ordinary people did extraordinary things. Clarence Smoyer passed away in 2022. He was 99 years old. By the time he died, his story had been told. People knew what he'd done. He got the recognition he deserved, even if it came late. And the footage of his shot is still available. You can watch it online. It's grainy and black and white, but when you know what you're looking at, it's incredible. You can see the Sherman fire. You can see the shell hit. You can see the smoke pour out of the panther, and you realize you're watching a moment that changed history. A moment that seemed impossible. A moment that happened because one young guy refused to give up, even when everything seemed hopeless. So yeah, when people tell me that one person can't make a difference, I think about Clarence Smoyer. I think about that 800-yard shot on a French street in 1944, and I remember that sometimes, in the right moment, with the right skills and a little bit of luck, one person can change everything. That's not just a war story. That's a life lesson. We all face moments where the odds seem impossible, where we have to do something we're not sure we can do, where everything is on the line and we're scared and we don't know if we're good enough. And in those moments, we have a choice. We can freeze, or we can take the shot. Clarence took the shot, and because he did, he and his crew lived to see the end of the war. They got to go home. They got to have families and lives and futures, all because in one crucial moment, one guy did the impossible. The legacy of that shot goes beyond just the tactical victory. It became a story that other tank crews heard about. It gave them hope. It showed them that even against superior German armor, even in the worst situations, they had a chance. Morale matters in war. When soldiers believe they can win, they fight harder. They take smarter risks. They don't give up. And stories like Clarence's helped build that belief. Every time a Sherman crew faced a panther or a tiger, they probably thought about guys like Clarence who had beaten the odds. And maybe that gave them the confidence to take their own shot, to try the impossible, to survive one more day. War is full of statistics and strategies, but at its core, it's about people. People making split-second decisions. People overcoming fear. People protecting their friends. That panther could have killed Clarence and his crew. It could have stopped the American advance. It could have led to more deaths, more destruction, more suffering. But it didn't, because one person, in one moment, did something incredible. That's the power of the individual. That's why history isn't just about big movements and major events. It's about these small moments that add up to something bigger. Every soldier who fought, every person who contributed, they all had their own moments, their own challenges, their own victories. And together, all those individual moments created the outcome of the war. So the next time you feel like what you do doesn't matter, remember this story. Remember that a young guy from Pennsylvania, scared and under pressure, made an impossible shot and changed the course of a battle. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to do your best when it counts. That's all any of us can do. And sometimes, if we're lucky, our best is enough. Clarence's best was more than enough. It was legendary. If you want to learn more about the real heroes of World War II, check out the next video.